Thank you for joining us today on Geezers of Gear, episode number 201. Today's podcast is brought to you by Elation Professional. Elation offers its Stadium Trio for large-scale arena and stadium projects that require only the most brilliant luminaires. The Proteus Brutus, an LED wash FX light with up to 75,000 lumens of cutting power. The Proteus Excalibur, the brightest IP65 full-featured beam fixture on the market. And, of course, the Proteus Maximus, a 50,000 lumen LED profile luminaire with a complete FX system. These all come equipped with Elation's proven IP65 Proteus protection. The Brutus, Excalibur, and Maximus, a powerhouse trio of compatible luminaires for maximum impact indoors or out. Check them all out at www.elationlighting.com. And today's podcast is also brought to you by Mainlight. Looking for exceptional value and flexibility in your lighting rental needs? Mainlight, your trusted rental partner, is now offering long-term leasing. You can now take advantage of up to 60% off rental list price, with even greater discounts available after 52 weeks. With this attractive leasing option, designed for a minimum term of 26 weeks, you'll find featured items from moving lights, leading consoles, truss, and LED inventory, allowing your company to stretch its capital expenditures even further. As a lighting rental partner, Mainlight combines the resources of a national company with the personal touch of a local provider by consistently purchasing the latest technology in lighting, truss, and consoles. From the newest truss to a full array of lighting consoles, your lighting will have the tech it needs to reach peak performance. Mainlight also carry a robust inventory of IP65 fixtures, giving you a lighting solution for any outdoor show or venue, come rain, wind, or shine. Visit mainlight.com and trust Mainlight for the gear you want. And finally, please visit Coffee Cult, coffee with a K, cult with a K.com, and search for Geezer's Grind. The reviews are coming in constantly. People love this coffee as much as I do. And remember, all proceeds go to Roby Backstage and support folks in our industry with medical or other challenges. Again, please go to coffeecult.com, order Geezer's Grind, and you are supporting people who are in our industry and have needs through Roby Backstage. And well, hey, Rod.
Hey, Marcel.
How are you, man?
I'm good. You?
I'm doing okay. Do you recognize that song, perhaps?
I do, actually.
From your youth.
The two youths.
Yeah, two youths. Yeah, it's funny because people come up to me at like LDI or different trade shows and they're like, hey, dan, 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 dan. And they have no idea what the song is, but they know it from the intro to my podcast, right? But, you know, the story is, and he was actually supposed to record right before you. Gato was supposed to be recording yesterday with me, and he had a problem with his cat, so he had to postpone a couple of days. But the story is I reached out to Gato and I said, hey, can you just write me a little jingle for the start of my podcast for an intro? And he goes, I'm happy to, but you know, the that guitar lick on what's it called? Sweet Thing, is like one of the greatest licks I ever wrote. Just use that and I'll write you a release so you never have to pay royalties or anything. And I said, okay. So that's how it became.
Yeah, there's a lot of obscure Canadian licks and songs that most of my American friends are like, what?
Yeah.
Who?
Well, because, I mean, you know, Rush and Triumph made it and Bryan Adams and Loverboy made it. But, like, you know, even April Wine, not everyone knows April Wine. Like, some people do, but not a lot of people. But then you get into, like, Harlequin and Streetheart, some of the better bands, or Orphan, you know, Gil's favorite band.
I loved Orphan.
Oh my God, they were good. Like just
Queen
that
City
one
Kids.
song. Dun,
Yeah.
dun, 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 dun. What a great lick. It's just such a cool song. Every time it'll come up if I'm on like Apple Music has this Canadian classics or whatever it's called that I'll
Mhm.
listen to, and it'll come up on there every once in a while, and I'll just like stop whatever I'm doing and rock out to it. It's just such a cool song, cool
I still
voice.
pull up. I have an old little iPod that I still have a ton of old Harlequin and Street Heart and uh,
Yeah,
Kick Axe, all of the bands that I listened to when I
I
was
love that stuff,
a
man.
young man. Yeah,
Isn't it crazy that Kick Axe is still going?
yeah, those guys
It's
are great. You know,
it's wild, and I forget all their names, but what's the bass player's name? Because he still does all the same poses and he still uses
oh,
the axe bass and stuff.
Vic, Victor, yeah,
Victor, right?
yeah,
Victor,
yeah. I was still
yeah.
in touch with Vic. He came out a few years back. I was home in Regina, and one of my old uh, buddies that I used to do lights for his band put on a little reunion, and Vic came over and said hi, and
That's
haven't
cool.
talked to much of the other guys for quite some time, but yeah, they were like one of the most unfortunate bands of all time for like bad things happening to them. You
Yeah,
know,
like what?
they
What
well they
happened?
had they had their all of their instruments stolen in Winnipeg. They had their instruments repossessed before a concert in Ontario
Oh, Jesus
by the
Christ!
sheriffs. They had to borrow the opening act's instruments to actually play the show.
Oh no!
I mean, if they had a they had a rough time of it, you know. And even like their third album, they were supposed to have X amount of money to do that album. Turned out their manager used up that money in other places, so they didn't even have half the money they were
Oh
supposed to
my
have to
God!
record that album with. And
What a
that was about, I
nightmare.
joined them. That was when I joined up. Was right near the end there. We did a couple of quick tours of Canada.
Yeah,
For first, I was like Dean Zarowski's assistant, and then he moved on to Harlequin of all bands,
yeah,
and, and I moved up and became the LD.
yeah. No, I mean it's amazing. We had some really, really great bands in Canada, and again, everybody knows Rush, or most people know Rush. Most people know Triumph.
Hmm.
Um, which I'll tell you a weird one. Like I do a bunch of business with Gil Moore because he owns what's it called, uh, Master something Studios. I
Uh-huh.
forget.
Oh,
Metalwork.
Metalworks, yeah,
Yeah, Metalworks.
that's familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, in Toronto, and they have a production company as well, and I sell stuff for him. I sell him stuff every once in a while, but it's funny because a call will come through and it says Gilmore on my phone, and I'm like, that's so cool, like pinch the me of 40 years ago because he would be really impressed.
Yeah,
But
it was. I actually heard a funny one about Triumph the other day, and it was I was talking to a it was at Nook's Memorial of all things.
uh,
And I was talking to a production manager who worked with Triumph back in the day, and he was like, "Yeah, yeah, you remember that band from Canada? Poor Man's Rush,
Max
Triumph."
Webster, Max Webster. I don't know.
Yeah,
There's a lot of poor man's rushes in Canada.
yeah,
There were a lot of like sort of three-piece, like really good bands, I think. And I don't know, we had a lot of good bands, but
yeah. What was that? There was one San Santos or San. Uh,
I know who
they
you're
the
talking
the
about.
guitar player actually played with Triumph, but he kind of played behind the curtain.
Right. And that was
And then
the band was named after him, wasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah. What
yeah,
the hell were
Rick
they called?
Oh, gee, I can't remember
Yeah.
now, but
I don't remember either.
somebody will remember. But
Santos. Yeah, something like
yeah,
that. I don't know.
yeah,
Whatever. It's hard to
I,
remember everything that happened back then because we were all like a little bit into
tipsy.
some stuff that we weren't supposed to be doing for the most part, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. I don't think
yeah.
people understand when the drinking age is 18. Like, I remember going to parties outside of Calgary. There was this place called The Trees, and it was literally
Mhm.
just a clump of trees, and everybody would park in the middle of it and light a bonfire, and whoever had the loudest stereo would be blasting the stereo out of their car. And just terrible things happened at these parties,
Yes.
I mean, it was a good time, but when I look back at it, the stuff I can remember, I was like, wow, we were out of control, you
Oh,
know?
like some of the parties that took place at the Beacon were, you know,
Oh,
beyond legendary.
beyond legendary. Some of the Guy
I
Jones parties were nuts at the Beacon.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, I remember being there with Kickaxe and like literally, the guy walking in the room and taking the mirror off the wall and throwing it on the bed, and That's about the last thing I remember.
Oh my God. Yeah. There's so many wild stories. I'll tell you, I've got a picture of it here somewhere of the night, but one night, oh no, it wasn't the Beacon. It was Misty's at the Westgate. One night, Motley Crue. I'm backstage with Motley Crue, and I'd been hanging out with um, Nikki and Tommy all day, driving them around in my Corvette with the two of them with me, three of us in a 77 Corvette or whatever it was with the tops off because they were so big. And they were just like, yeah, let's go over here. Yeah, let's do this. And I'm like, this is insane. I'm a taxi driver for unruly rock stars. But so at the end of the night, this was right after they killed the guy from Hanoi Rocks, right
Yep.
after, what's his name, the singer?
Razzle.
No, yeah, but Razzle was the one who, Vince Neil was
Yep.
driving and Razzle died. And so they were kind of on lockdown. And Tommy, I don't know if I should say this out loud, but Tommy was really into, and I don't know if you remember a girl who worked for us at Mainly Music called Bev. Really, really nice looking young lady.
Mhm.
She went on to become a movie star, moved to Vancouver, got married, whatever. I haven't spoken to her in 30 years probably, but
Mhm.
anyways, Tommy was really into Bev, and Tommy was married at the time to, I believe, Heather Locklear. And anyways, the road manager or the tour manager wanted no part of it. He's like, get in the bus. We're all leaving together, Tommy. And he goes, no, man, I want to hang out with my buddies and go to this club and we're going to hang out and have some fun. We'll behave. I promise. No, no, Tommy. And I could hear over the radio. It was like, no, Tommy, get in the fucking bus. It's time to go because they had to go to Edmonton. And so long story short, the bus is following my Corvette to Misty's to go to see Guy Jones band at Misty's.
Yep.
And I call the girl at Misty's and I'm like, hey, it's Marcel. Hey, Marcel, you coming down? I'll put you on the list. I go, yeah, it's me plus Bev, who's sitting next to me, and Motley Crue. And she goes, yeah, okay, whatever. And I go, no, no. She goes, who do you want on the list? I said, me, Bev, and Motley Crue. And she's like, whatever, I'll see you in a bit. And, we pull up the bus right in front of Misty's and they all come in. Well, not all of them. Vince wasn't allowed to leave the bus, but it was, I think it was just Tommy and Nikki.
Mhm.
And that's when I learned that stuff that they were drinking, I thought it was like iced tea coming out of Jack Daniels bottles, right? But we went to the end of the bar and they got like water glasses filled with Jack Daniels and we did a toast and they banged them back and I'm like watching them going, oh, I guess I got to drink the whole thing. And then they're like, more, 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 and I was just like, man, I can't do this. I can't keep up with you guys. And then Tommy got up and played Smoking in the Boys Room with Guy Jones and he fell off the riser off the back of the stage. And it was just debauchery and ended up in a party in a couple of the Guy Jones rooms upstairs. And oh my God, total debauchery.
Yeah, those. I mean, some of the parties that took place in those days were far worse than the than some of the parties that I saw. Working for acts later in life.
Yeah.
It was like,
Yeah.
the real debauchery was in the '80s in the clubs
Oh,
in,
yeah.
in Western Canada.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, even were you around when Guns N' Roses played at the Beacon, and there were like 40 people there or something?
I wasn't there. I heard about it, but I was off
Yeah,
with some other
yeah,
band.
yeah. I was there, and I mean, they were garbage. It was like, what could you say? They're no good. We weren't used
Yeah.
to that music yet either. So
Yeah, well, didn't Motley Crue end up getting into like a fight up in Edmonton after that? They ended up going up to Edmonton and getting into a big
and
scrap with some people. And there's
doesn't
like some
surprise me.
legendary Motley Crue story of them. I think at the convention in South at CI South,
Oh
um,
boy, I remember
getting
some
into some.
debauchery there too.
Yeah,
Bad
yeah.
stories, bad stories, or the Rex. Remember the Rex?
Ooh, oh, who could forget the
Bad
Rex?
stories. Yeah.
Half weeks. Play. I always wanted to play the last 3 days, not the first 3 days at the
Uh,
Rex.
I saw Killer Dwarfs there like a couple of times and just hanging out with those guys and it was just stupidity, it was just
Oh yeah,
always stupidity. Like
they were.
how we're still alive,
Yeah,
it's
they
a
were
good thing.
buddies with the Kickaxe guys, and so they would come out every now and then when I was working with Kickaxe. As a matter of fact, we ended up having a barbecue in Winnipeg at Daryl Dwarf's house, the
Yeah.
drummer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I remember
everybody's
Daryl.
sitting around listening to Whitesnake.
Yeah.
Those
Funny.
guys were all true to form.
So, I mean, I didn't even really introduce you,
Mhm.
but Rod Gibson, I think better known as Red. And
Yep.
so, Red, it's not too much of a stretch to figure out where that name came from. Uh,
No.
no. You have one of the probably less interesting roadie nicknames, because everyone
Yeah, it
else has a
was.
story behind their nickname. You're just a redheaded guy called Red, right?
Yeah, it was actually kind of handy that way because nobody tagged me with anything that was, any worse. Once
Yeah.
you just got that name, and I kind of like my buddies didn't call me Red when I was growing up. That came when I went to work in a pipe mill after I'd gotten out of high school
Oh,
uh, in Regina called IPSCO, and all the guys had nicknames and whatnot, and kind of and somebody just tagged me with Red, and they all just started calling me that, and so it was
just
like, well,
made
that's kind of
sense.
easy, and
It
my real
worked.
name's Rod, so it's pretty close,
Yeah. So
and
do
everybody remembers.
in your adult years, do people still call you Red or is it Rod?
Mostly Red,
Oh,
you know.
really?
Yeah,
Huh.
family calls me Red, calls me Rod, but
Yeah.
most of the people that I work with in the business know me as Red.
Yeah, because I mean, some of those roadie stage name or not stage names, but road names or whatever you want to call it, nicknames, seem to stick, and other ones kind of go away when you come off the road, I guess.
Yeah,
Um, and there's some
I think
weird ones like Poop. Although his last name is Pooping or Poping
yeah,
or however you
well,
say it,
yeah,
but
yeah. That's an unfortunate nickname, really.
yeah, what's your name? Poop. Oh,
I'll never.
how'd you get
First
that?
time first
Yeah.
time I ever heard that was I was actually on tour with Skinnerd, and we had a Schoenberg moving motor system,
Okay.
and my motor guy Bill came up to me. He goes, "Hey, I just got a call from this dude that they called me to ask about the Schoenberg system. They gave him my name. He had like the worst nickname ever." I'm like, "Really? What was that?" He goes, "Poop." I'm like, "Well, that is a terrible nickname."
Yeah.
But then I later met Poop and
Yeah.
found out Poping kind of fit. And
Yeah. I think I met him when he was with Creed. I think I had a bunch of stuff out with them and he was the LD, inspect it and stuff, and became very friendly with him. But yeah, I always thought that was a funny one. There's so many funny ones out there. But so you grew up in Regina, which
yeah,
everyone outside of Canada just thinks it's a name that rhymes with fun, right?
yep,
Um, that can't really be a city name. Like everybody chuckles every time they hear the name of the
yeah.
of the city, right?
My wife told one of her friends when we lived in Georgia. She said, "Oh yeah, well Rod's from Regina," and she said, "I'm pretty sure a good Southern girl would call that Regina."
That's pretty funny. That's really good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
where you could watch your dog run away for 3 days.
it's true. I mean, and my girlfriend is British, and I'm up in Canada right now in Canmore, just outside of Calgary, in the mountains, and so we shipped my car into Chicago. Brilliant idea, which I'll never do again. But we shipped my car to Chicago and then drove from Chicago up to here. 22-hour drive or something, stopped to see some friends on the way. But we went through Regina, and once she got over laughing, she was like, "Wow, you can see really far here." And I said, "Yeah, that's kind of the idea.
Yeah,
It's pretty flat."
it
Yeah.
freaked my wife out the first time that I took her home to meet my parents, and we drove from Vancouver to Regina, and when we got out, onto the prairies, she grew up in Princeton, and so she was used to being in the mountains
Yeah.
and seeing mountains around her. And so when we got out on the prairies, it freaked her out. She was like, "It feels too open.
Yeah.
I feel exposed." And I was like,
It-
"Well, this is what it is." And
yeah. Yeah.
she said, "You used to like deer hunt and stuff." I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Where the hell would you hunt deer out here? There's no trees."
Yeah. Where are they hiding?
She goes, "What
He
kind
was
of
pretty
stupid
much,
deer are you hunting? They
yeah,
they
you
they,
walk
they
up and
don't see
tap
you
him on the
coming for a
shoulder.
mile."
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Crazy. No, it's true.
Yeah.
You know what? Speaking of deer, so on
Hmm.
said drive that I took from Chicago, we started seeing roadkill deer in Wisconsin, like I'm talking every couple of miles, another deer. We counted, and I mean, we probably started 10 in and said, we're
Mhm.
going to start counting these. And I think we got to like 36 or something. I mean, I don't understand what the deal is with deer in Wisconsin getting run over by cars. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. You
Yeah.
probably haven't
And
experienced this crazy thing.
the part I was when you go through Wyoming and you see things that got like it's so in the desolate areas of Wyoming, when you get around the Devil's Tower and stuff,
Right.
and you just see things hanging off of like barbed wire fences where they got nailed by semis going by. And like, ugh.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. You got
It's
hit
like a scene
good.
from
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, some of these
things you
deer
see
that
out
we
of the windows of a bus, as you're going by.
true, huh? True. No,
Yeah,
but some of these deer in Wisconsin were like mangled, like they definitely
yeah.
got hit by something big. But I thought it was weird. Like I've seen roadkill, but nothing like that. And it's funny because it reminded me. I used to have a British business partner who he kind of grew up in rural England and was sort of an English version of a redneck.
Mhm.
And whenever he saw roadkill, he'd pull over, and if it was still warm, he'd throw it in the back of his truck and take it home and carve it up and barbecue it, whatever it was. It didn't matter what it was. And I was just like, "Are you serious?" Like, so every time I see like a dead something on the side of the road, I'm thinking, "Yep, he'd be eating that right now." But
Well, there was, when I lived in the South, that wasn't uncommon uh, for people to pick things up. There was
yeah,
one day I actually had a guy coming over to fix my washer, and he was a handyman that came over all the time, and he came in late, and he wasn't there, and he was always on time. So I ended up finally getting a phone call from him, and he says, "Hey, I can't make it. I hit a deer." And I said, "Oh, no problem." He said, "I'll see you tomorrow." So he came in the next day. I said, "So you hit a deer?" And he says, "Yeah, I was coming down the road in my van, and there was a van coming towards me, and a deer ran out of the ditch in front of the van that was coming at me, and that guy ran into it, and then another buck came out of the ditch just as I was watching that. Another buck came out of the ditch from the other side, right in front of me, and bam, I hit it, and we were
Jesus,
stopped like 40 yards apart on the road, and each got a dead deer in front of us." And he said, about 5 minutes passed. Guy pulled up in a pickup truck, looked at the other guy, said, "Hey, you want that?" He said, "Nope." Threw it in the back of his truck, left. 5 more minutes passed. Another guy came coming the other way in a truck, said, "You want that?" "Nope." Threw it in the back of his truck. He said, "No, not 15 minutes had passed, and they were both gone. And it was just two wrecked vans in the middle of the road."
crazy. And then you're trying to tell the cop, "No, seriously, there were
Oh,
deer here."
there were deer here.
I'm telling you, we hit deer. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's funny. So, grew up in Regina,
Yep.
and were you into the music scene there? Like, because there's some great bands that came out of Regina. We mentioned a few of them, like Orphan and that stuff, and
Yeah.
um,
Queen City Kids,
yeah,
which
another great
uh,
band.
Cambridge. They were originally like called Cambridge.
Yeah,
Um, I wasn't really into the scene so much, but my buddy, one of my best friends, was a guitar player, and he started his first band when he was about 16 years old, and so kind of hung around while they played the high school dances and whatnot, and
yeah,
um, but never really was into the scene so much. Had my own thing that I was doing, and sort of was on the fringe when I'd be around my buddy's band and whatnot. And then um, just kind of one day, it was the early '80s, and recession, and I got laid off from my gig out at IPSCO in the pipe mill,
yeah.
and my buddy was like, "Hey, we're doing a show down in, I think, Estevan or Weyburn, somewhere in southern Saskatchewan. We need somebody to do the lights. Can you do it?" "Sure."
Yeah.
so so I went down there and set up this little light show, and like, okay, I can play along,
Back
and
then,
did
it was
that for
just
a
like
while.
light switches, right? Turn them on, turn them off,
It
like a little
was
desk
Yeah,
that
it
somebody
was a
made.
six. I want to say I had 18 lights and six channels.
Yeah,
You know, so grouped them up as best you could with and then tried to figure out how to play. The first couple gigs, I don't think I even had a snake long enough to get out in front of the band. I did it from beside the stage.
yeah,
So
yeah. Most of the
and
light guys that I had when I was playing, we never did anything big. So our light guy was always at the side of the stage. Like
Yeah,
I never knew a light guy to be out at the front of house. That was like unheard of
yeah,
in my
yeah.
playing
So
days.
in later years, when I went back to, I ended up leaving that and working as a truck driver for a little bit, and then moved to Alberta to work on the oil rigs. And just hated the bloody oil rigs. That was the worst job in the world.
It
And my
pays
buddy,
well, but yeah, it's hard work, huh?
yeah, a lot of money, but you're just covered in oil and goo all the time. It
Yeah.
comes out of your pores,
Ugh.
and it was cold.
Yeah.
Winter in I think it was I was on out of where I remember it the most is I was actually out on a rig when the shuttle blew up, and heard
Oh,
about it over the radio when we were out
wow.
there.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then so when I ended up, my buddy called and said, "Hey, putting the band back together. You want to come do lights?" And I thought, well, I could do that. That'd be a whole lot more fun than what I'm doing right now. And
Yeah.
so I did, and the, I had 24 lights and a 12 channel RE switcher board, no
Okay.
dimming, just two scenes of 12. Just keep switching them up and then flipping between them, and then little bump buttons on the top so you could individually hit a channel. But they had the sharpest little um, buttons, and they would just. I had calluses like a guitar player on my fingers from
Ah,
holding those buttons.
interesting.
Yeah,
So you had no experience, no knowledge, like just the little 6-channel desk that you had the one time and now this one. And you were just kind of learning as you go, right? Somebody
pretty
needs to
much.
turn
Yeah,
on and off the lights. Might as well be you.
yeah, and the one of the guitar players in the band actually owned the lighting system. He had sort of imitated the Gil Hopkins method of, well, own the lights, and then when the band breaks up, take the lights with you
Yeah.
and become a business.
It seemed to do
It
okay for Gil.
worked out well for Gil.
Yeah.
And
Seems to
as a
have
matter of
worked
fact,
out.
Gil was with my buddy who I started doing lights for. His first kind of touring band, Gil Hopkins was the lighting guy for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's how I
Gil
met
grew
Gil.
up in Regina as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. He was a drummer, and
yeah.
drummers tend to gravitate towards lights, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, um,
Interesting.
but yeah, so Gil, I knew, and when I took the job, I was like, well, Gil's at that point. Gil was actually fairly successful in Calgary, and by my measurement of success, he had an apartment and a van and and
Yeah.
owned a bunch of lights. So
Yeah.
um,
So Gil Hopkins, just for those who are listening or watching and don't know, Gil Hopkins owned a company called ProLight Productions in Calgary for many years. I met him, I don't even remember when, probably
yeah,
82 or something.
in the '80s,
And
yeah.
yeah, he I guess was probably sort of the go-to lighting shop in Calgary for a long time.
For a long time, yeah, he was that. There really wasn't another lighting company there, and he was in a warehouse with a company called Rocky Mountain Sound,
Yeah.
and so they would often get hired together to do shows and small events around town and whatnot. So
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So you're now doing lights for the guy, for your buddy,
yeah,
and you've left the oil rigs. And was that
yes,
like sort of the last real job you ever had, that oil rig job?
yep,
Cool.
yeah, that
You've
was
been
the
in the
end of it.
lighting business ever since.
Yeah, for about 40 years now. So
Wow, that's quite a run.
yeah, yeah.
And they said it wouldn't last, right?
It was kind of funny when I went and did it. Of course, my family wanted to disown me, and everybody was like, "Well, when are you gonna when you get a real job?"
Yeah.
Is this a real job? I get
Yeah.
paid, not much, but I get paid.
Yeah.
And I always, funnily enough, when I started doing it, Gil was a bit of an inspiration to me because he had done something with his time with the bands, and I thought that there was always a place to go. There was some upward mobility within it. I didn't just want to be working for the band, and I never referred to myself as a member of any of the bands. I was like, no, no, I work for them. I'm
Yeah.
not a member.
You're
They'll
not part of the
they'll they'll
band.
break up. They'll go on to whatever. I'm looking to get me somewhere in this
Yeah.
business. So I
Yeah.
became more focused as time went on about that.
Yeah. It's amazing how many companies started out just like that, like Gills, but upstaging.
Yeah.
Robert Carone was buddies with the guys in Cheap Trick, and they needed a lighting guy. He went and bought a few lights, and it got to be a few more and a few more. As the band grew, so did upstaging,
Yeah.
and the rest is history. I mean, one of the great touring companies out there.
Yeah, well, I think like even like East Coast stage lighting, I think Bob kind of built that on Boston for the
Yeah,
most part.
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, it was kind of funny
And
how the people grew up around bands that and they just kept servicing it because there really wasn't that much of a huge business.
well, Smoother's story with Delicate too, right?
Yeah,
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 he came here with Supertramp and he needed a company, and boom, he started one. So
yeah. Kept
yeah,
all that Martin PA.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So yeah.
I've
So what's
stacked a few
next?
boxes of Martin PA over the years,
Well,
through those.
yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember like when we used to play, we were playing with the JBL W bins and the 4560 mid-range things, and I think it was
Yeah,
Altec horns or something. I mean,
yeah,
it was heavy, it was big, it was loud and obnoxious. There was tons of feedback and stuff. There was no science behind it. It was just raw horsepower. You need more power,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
And then all of a sudden, Martin came out with these small, sleek boxes, that were kind of funky shaped, and this mid-range thing that don't open that. You don't need to know what's
yeah.
in it, right? The
The
mid, the mid thing was
the
like,
Philishave.
yeah, exactly. But it was like, whoa, this is secret science stuff going on here,
Yeah.
and the stuff was a lot smaller, sounded really good, and all of a sudden people had double stacks of that stuff on each side, and you probably did. I remember Boys Room used to have a whole lot of PA.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
And a bus to carry it in.
yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
Boys Room, what was the singer's name? I think he worked for me for a while at Mainly Music in Edmonton.
Kevin Hicks.
Kevin, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
he's still
wonder.
around. He lives up in I see him on Facebook a lot. He lives up in um northern BC.
Oh
I
wow,
think he works in the pipeline industry up there.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty close with Kevin for a while, and he needed to get off the road because I think maybe it was his wife. He got married really young, and I think she wanted him off the road or something, and that didn't end well. But yeah, well, and didn't Jim Yakubuski worked for Boys Room too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were the lighting
Yeah.
guy. He was sound guy.
Actually, he left prior to my. I knew Jim. We met, through the course of bands over the years, and
Right.
he left just prior to my joining. The guy who was doing lights, Wayne, decided to move over to sound when Jim left,
Oh, okay.
and made his trek south. I think basically said, I'll come work at DB Sound. I'll just do anything in the shop until you send me on the road or do something. So
Well, I
he
think.
left and went off. I'm sure there's a whole lot more to the story than that, but
Yeah.
he left and went down south. And so their lighting guy moved over to being a sound guy, and I came on board as the lighting guy.
Right.
And then I worked with Jim later in Vancouver with a couple of different bands when he was in between Triumph. He actually
Yeah.
worked for Triumph, come full circle.
Yeah.
And
Crazy.
yeah, but yeah, Jim was a bit of an inspiration to me because he just went. He was like he went for it, decided to
Yeah.
go and do something.
Yeah. No,
And
me too. I mean, when I moved to the U.S., he was probably one of the guys who inspired me to do it. He was like, "Oh man, it's such a bigger market, and there's so many more opportunities." And in a sense, he was right. I mean, for me, I felt like I wanted to be a bigger fish, and the pond was too small in Canada.
yeah,
And so that was part of my motivation. Plus, I married an American girl who, she wasn't going to move to Canada. So if I wanted to have this relationship, I had to move to the U.S. anyway. But yeah, so I mean, similar motivation. But wasn't I? And you might not even know this, but I seem to remember Jim's first like real gig with DB was, hey, go out and do monitors for this guitar player guy named Ingwie Malmsteen.
yeah,
And he said it was the toughest gig he had ever done in his life because first he wanted his guitar at like warp volume in every stage monitor, right? Like, so nobody could hear anything except his guitar. and it was
Yeah.
just squealing and feeding back all the time. And whenever it made a noise it wasn't supposed to make, he'd just look over at the side of the stage at the monitor guy and just go, like, I'm going to kill you and fire you, you know?
Yeah.
And I guess he just wasn't an easy guy to work for back in those days.
No. And yeah, and he had yeah, so he did was like that, and he did a few other things. He ended up with Striper and a few other
Yeah.
bands. But he was that was kind of inspired me. Like, well, if Jim can do it, then I could do it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I found the same sort of thing. It was like after I had worked in the bar scene in Western Canada for a long time. Eventually, I was like, things weren't going to happen in Alberta. You either had to. I figured you either had to go to Toronto or Vancouver,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to go to Toronto. But I loved Vancouver, and I thought that
Yeah.
whole scene there was, and that was right about the time that Bon Jovi had just released "Slippery When Wet," and the Vancouver scene was just hopping, and so
Well,
I moved there.
I'm sure you don't know this, but Bruce Fairbairn is or
Mhm.
was my cousin,
Oh,
and
I didn't know that.
cousin through, so not a blood cousin. My mom remarried when I was young, and my
Mhm.
stepdad, uh, uh, it was his relative. So that's
Ah,
where I got my name from, Fairbairn. And
ah,
so, anyways, yeah, cousin. But the thing is, I didn't really even realize that until I had quit being a musician. And then I went, well, geez, why didn't I ever put two and two together and realize that this famous producer,
Mhm.
not that he could do anything for my terrible playing, but, uh, who knows? I mean, if
Yeah,
Motley Crue got famous, I guess I probably could have as a bass
yeah.
player. But
There was a lot of bands that recorded there that
yeah,
you know Bruce made sound really good.
yeah. Well, Aerosmith Pump was one of them.
Yeah,
I mean, that was such an incredible album, and Bon
yeah,
Jovi, Slippery When Wet, and like just lots and lots of really great stuff he did. He was a bit of a genius.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
So that whole
Vancouver was hopping. You
yeah,
know.
it really was, and then but what I found over the years was like like I ended up working in Vancouver for a long time, and I did a few tours in Canada, but there was always you always ran up into it was funny because the Canadian scene was really small even on a national level.
Yeah.
It was like you went on tour. Like I remember I went on tour once with the Bare Naked Ladies a little later in my career, but it was got off that tour and then I started a tour with the Tragically Hip and in the new year, and it was like got on the same bus that I'd been on the Bare Naked Ladies. The
Oh
truck
my
drivers were the
goodness.
same truck drivers that had been on the Bare Naked Ladies. It was,
Yeah.
half of the crew that was on that was people that had been on the last tour I'd been on.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But
Very
when I
small
worked in
feeling.
when I worked
Yeah.
in the States, it was like, you ended a tour and then you went to the next tour. It was, new different sound companies. It might be, Maryland Sound, might be Showco, might be Clare Brothers, amongst others. And you always ran into different people. It was such
Yeah.
a different market from what
Yeah.
you saw in Canada. I used to,
Yeah. No, I
you,
I completely agree with that. I completely
yeah.
agree with that. So somehow you ended up in the U.S. How did that happen?
Well, I was doing a tour for Marty. I tried to look at who was who in the U.S. and but you can't just send resumes out. People don't react to that kind of thing. You have to get known by somebody.
Yeah.
And I ended up doing a tour for a country artist named Marty Stewart,
Okay.
and the LD was a guy named Dino DeRose,
Yeah.
and he had just finished Kiss. He had been Kiss's LD for several tours,
Hmm.
and had just finished the Revenge tour, and he was doing this tour for Marty Stewart, and he had to leave a little early to go to Very Light School. He was going to do Very Lights for Hank Williams Jr. But he'd also been Cinderella's lighting director as well,
Right. Yeah.
and so he had kind of an interesting resume of working with a lot of bigger bands. And at the end of the tour, when he was leaving, he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, would you come work for me south of the border?" And yeah, I would. So I said, "Okay, I'll be in touch. Get your resume together and send it to this company in Atlanta called R.A. Roth." I said, "Okay." So I put my resume together, such as it was, and sent it off. And I didn't hear anything for months. Didn't think much of it, and I ended up one day I got my pager just started going off at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and lived in a little apartment in Burnaby, and I couldn't figure out who the hell was trying to call me. But it was like 5 in the morning, and I worked with club bands and whatnot still, and a little bit, and so didn't go to bed that early. So 5 in the morning was a little early for me, and I didn't want to get up and answer the pager. So, but it just wouldn't stop. So finally, I got up and I listened to it, and it was this guy from Atlanta, and he said that he'd gotten my name from Dino, and they wanted me to crew chief Deep Purple in South America. So I
Damn.
just, oh, okay.
Yeah. Who called you?
Little,
Was it Roth or was it Looney?
it was Bill Conti. Of all
Oh,
people.
there you go.
Yeah, there's a name from the past.
Yes, absolutely.
So I ended up going and I had a union call that day to do the Stone Temple Pilots out at the P&E. And it was the Stone Temple Pilots and the Butthole Surfers, and they were playing in the old pool out there, and it was a West Sun stage. West Sun was a company I worked with a lot. And anyway, I got out there, and they were late. They'd gotten held up at the border and had a tough time coming in. And so I just heard all this news this morning about this possibly working for R.A. Roth, and it was an R.A. Roth gig. So I started dropping names, around people to see if they would react. And the guy who was the lighting crew chief finally stopped me, says, "What's your name?" And he goes, I said, "It's Rod Gibson. Most people call me Red." He goes, "You're the guy I'm supposed to talk to. I talked to Dino about you last night. I need you to join this tour tomorrow in Seattle."
And which tour was that? Stone Temple Pilots?
Stone Temple Pilots.
Oh, wow. And you were local labor.
Local labor, just on the union call.
Jesus.
But I had gotten a call from the company that morning. So the next day I drove down to Seattle and jumped on the bus, and that was the start of my working for American companies.
And you were crew chief?
No, I was just one of the lighting guys on that one.
Oh, okay.
I was actually a bit of the bitch boy for the LD, who I won't mention because they don't like him.
Okay, then I'm gonna have to look it up on my own. So, at what point did you meet RA?
I met RA when we got to Atlanta on that tour. And Robert, the inimitable Robert Roth, came in very loud. Shirt open down to here.
He doesn't have an indoor voice.
No,
Robert doesn't have an indoor. It's like, Robert, shh. We're in the Beverly Hills Hotel. You can't talk that loudly. Shh.
Yeah, go out to dinner and look, all the tables around are listening to your conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. I love the guy. I mean, he's a good guy. He's a great storyteller, and he's a good sales guy. And
he's one of the best.
One of the funny things about Robert, not funny, but one of his probably his secret sauce kind of things is, I think he's one of the best account execs at dealing with troubled people. Difficult designers or difficult production managers or just, really complex situations. He's really good at it. He doesn't get flustered.
No, what I've always liked about Robert and what he kind of taught me over the years working with him was Robert was always very solution oriented.
Yeah.
Not worried about the problem. It's how do we get past the problem and onto the solution?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very, very true. I love Robert. I talk to him all the time still. But so you met him, and
I ended up, finishing up that tour. Didn't really know Robert, but Bill pulled me aside when we were in Atlanta and asked me if I could rig, and I said, well, I rig, but like ground rigger at the Coliseum, and rig a few small gigs. I can hang a few points, but I was never like a rigger, like a tour rigger. And he was like, well, could you tour rig for Bobby Brown? I was like, that seems a little more complicated than what I could do. But so I didn't end up taking that gig because it seemed like it would have been a stretch. And and I went back to Canada, and they called me that fall and said, hey, we need you to go out and do Leonard Skinnard. So I they sent me flight information and whatnot, and I flew down to Atlanta.
Sorry to interrupt, but how does that work? Like when you're a Canadian and you live in Canada and R.A. Roth calls you and says, we need to put you out on this tour, are they paying you How are they paying you, or are you just a contractor, or how does that work?
There's some interesting things that are
And
going
I'm
on with
not
all
with
of
the
that.
IRS. I'm not investigating you. Not
Yeah,
that they investigate anyone, by the way. But
no. Well,
yeah,
as far as it's interestingly enough, the IRS doesn't care as long as you file the taxes, and I always filed
right,
the taxes.
right.
But Robert 1099 does, so we were contractors basically.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
and for me, it was being a Canadian, it was like taking a 25 to 30% bump in pay
Yeah,
when I converted back to Canadian, right?
yeah. You're getting your same
Yeah,
rate, but in U.S. dollars. A
yeah,
dollar's a dollar when you're out on the road, right? But until you go and put it back in your Canadian bank and go, whoa, that
yeah.
happened. That was
That
nice.
works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So anyway, I ended up flying down to Atlanta, and landed at the airport. This is my first time in the Atlanta airport. Landed at like 10 or 11 at night, and then had to go catch the train. They said get off at this station. So I got on the MARTA train. Never really been in Atlanta other than at the at Chastain at the amphitheater, and now
yeah.
all of a sudden here I am at the airport in the middle of the night and getting on a train to some stop I don't know, and got off there, and it was the middle of the hood, and was kind of wondering about what I was doing standing there with my luggage at the end of this cul-de-sac where the train let
That's
me
a
off.
deep dive into culture at that point,
Yeah,
right? Taking the MARTA
and
into the wrong neighborhood. Oops.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden this piece of junk Honda Civic comes roaring around the corner, half a muffler and no hubcaps, and been in several accidents obviously, and comes whipping around and whips in front of me, and Bill Conti opens the door and says, Get in, throw your luggage in the trunk."
Oh my
So I did,
God.
and they took me straight to the shop. I walked into the shop, and by this time it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and they're in the middle of prep for the gig. So and that's when I met Bob Looney for the first time.
Uh,
He was the crew chief in the LD, and they pointed me that's your truss over there. Go put the wheels on it. So I literally went over and pulled these pieces of truss and got a forklift over and lifted it up and put wheels on the bottom of it, and started figuring out how to patch the, the system, because Robert had a very interesting way of patching lighting that nobody else used.
yeah.
Um, the the weed box and the big Pile National 19 pin, or was it 19? And it was we ended up having like a 16 channels per box or something like that, if my
Yeah.
memory serves me correctly. And I had to patch this thing and wire the ACLs in series within the little box, and learn all of this stuff. And speaking of nicknames, at that point, I didn't know Bob at all. So
Yeah.
after a couple of days and prep and whatnot and getting this thing together, I finally turned to him and I said, "So why do they call you Looney?" I assumed it was a nickname.
Yeah. Cause that's
He said,
my name. Yeah.
"Yeah, that's my name."
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? It's a
Yeah.
great name.
And so I ended up touring with that Skinner tour with Looney and Rob Savage and Jim Chapman's brother, um, and and I forget who else was all there, but it was a rough tour.
Yeah.
The Skinner guys were pretty rough. There
Yeah.
was there was I hadn't seen that much white stuff around since my days in Western Canada, so
Well,
they
and
were
what
pretty
was
hardcore.
what's the bass Leon?
Yeah.
Leon Looney, I think, was telling me a story about Leon disappeared after a gig. I think it was in like Jacksonville or something. And
Hmm.
then the next night they were playing like West Palm at the Shed, and nobody had seen or heard of Leon. And
Yeah.
it's now like, an hour before sound check, and people are starting to freak out and stuff. And Leon comes walking up with no shoes on, wearing the same clothes that he had the night before. Big smile on his face. He's like, "Hey guys, we sound checking." you
Yeah.
know, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just crazy.
Leon was an interesting character.
Yeah.
I spent a little time with him.
Oh,
Um,
did you?
oh yeah, he liked to go out. So I ended up doing that tour with him, and when I ended that tour, I said, "Never again. I am not going out with Leonard Skinner ever
My
again in my
liver
life."
ain't gonna take it.
Well, and just um, they were so what's the word I'm searching for? screwed up,
Yeah.
all the time. Like there was
Yeah.
just so much drugs out there and so much alcohol. I mean, the whole gig could be in the
They
shitter in the
like
morning, but
they like to party.
yeah, the
Yeah.
gig could be in the shitter in the morning, but there was always 24 Heinekens on ice in the production office at 7 a.m.
Oh my God.
You could get your per
Wow.
diem however you wanted it.
Yeah. That's funny.
So
That's funny.
it was literally a lot of that, and I just it was really hard to things don't go smoothly when things are like that. So
Yeah. No, I
um
can completely understand that.
so and as uh, as someone from Canada now touring with a lot of people from the southern United States, it was a very eye-opening experience for me, shall we say.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
things, a lot, of,
You
a
were,
lot of things I had never heard before or seen before.
yeah. No, I mean, honestly, same me coming from Canada. And, I never had anything to do with touring. I sold guitars in
Hmm.
Canada, and then I got into selling sound systems and lighting packages and stuff. So I got hired by Martin because I was one of the few people who knew anything about their product. And that turned into a really great career. But I didn't have any access to, like, I mean, did I have access to touring? Yes. I did clubs myself.
Hmm.
I had a lot of friends that did clubs. I worked for Brimstone Productions at one point back in the day for Bear at Brimstone. And I was like a scrawny little 130-pound kid or whatever doing security for Brimstone Productions for like Kiss and all these big shows and stuff. I'm like, what am I going to do security? I ain't stopping anybody. I'll just move out of the way, you know?
Yeah.
But I had to stop that though at a Kiss gig in Calgary. Um, a truck driver for Kiss said, "Hey, come over here," and he's showing me where the beer is, and I'm like 16 or 17 years old. I'm like, "Hey, cool." I was probably 16, and he's like, "Hey, you can drink this stuff," and I'm like, "Oh, really?" And he pours me a vodka or something. Well, then next thing I realize, this guy's hitting on me. Like this truck driver wants me to go hang out in his truck with him, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's not gonna happen."
That's not happening.
I decided this gig ain't for me. Plus, I'm a little too scrawny to be a security guy. But yeah, I mean, same thing. When I got to the U.S. and I started, like, I won't say which tour or which guy it was, but I went to a particular show and I was standing front of house next to the LD at the I forget which Avo desk it was. I think a Diamond, the one that had the keyboard tray that everybody used for blow.
Yeah.
And so I'm standing next to him, and he pulls out the tray, and it's got like 10 nicely cut little lines in it or whatever. And he goes, "Partake?" And I'm like, "No, no, I'm good, thank you." But I'm just sitting here going, "Fuck, there's like 20,000 people in this arena, and you're doing lines of blow out of the console right now? Like, holy shit, what's going on?" So
Yeah.
yeah, that was sort of my indoctrination.
I don't know if you remember, but many years ago when you were still working for Martin, I did a tour for Yes. And at the end of the tour, you brought out a bunch of swag at
Yeah.
the tour. And
Yep.
I have the Martin putter that you gave me. I
Oh,
used it for
really?
years as my putter
That
in
was a
in my golf
terrible
bag.
putter. You use that thing?
Yeah,
I used to have to
just
wear
because
the
it had.
Martin blue jeans. Those were the
Oh,
worst. I don't know who fit those things, but I certainly didn't.
yeah,
But
I used
wow.
that putter just because it was a good story. I
Yeah.
didn't care about my golf game.
No, I
I,
remember
I
that
now
Yes
use an
tour. That
Edmonton
was
Oilers putter.
that was Smeaton, right?
Uh,
I think Smeaton was the LD.
oh no, it was Nick Sholem.
Was it Nick?
Yeah, Nick Sholem.
So which tour was it? Because I was
Uh,
involved with a couple of them, and I'm sure Smeaton did one of the ones that we were involved
yeah, a
in, the
few
Talk
people. It
tour.
was he took
Talk.
over. John Broderick had done the one before,
Oh,
and
okay.
then I think it was Nook that worked some sort of deal. Nick got hired, and Nook worked some deal, and I ended up going out on that tour like right after my wedding,
Oh,
literally
right.
right
Yeah.
after my wedding, because they didn't tell me that I had to leave the day after I got
Oh
married.
my God. That goes
Until
over well, that conversation, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, brilliant. 120 people at a venue in White Rock, lovely wedding, spent all this money. And then, yeah, drive me to the airport tomorrow, would you?
Oh, so she didn't even know until like your wedding night? that you were
Well,
leaving the
no,
next
till a
day?
couple of days before. I didn't know till a couple of days before. I thought I wasn't going out till like, I think it was like the 19th or 20th. I got married on the 13th. But they forgot, or they conveniently forgot to tell me that, when I accepted it, that, so I thought I'd be home for like 3 or 4 days afterwards, and I'd
Right.
come home from funny enough, a Leonard Skinner tour 5 days before,
Oh,
and
Jesus.
then I got a call from Looney, and he said, "Hey, we forgot about pre-production, so we actually, need you there on the 15th." So I was like, "Okay, well, get me a red eye on the 14th. At least I got the next day." And then he
Yeah.
called me back a few days later. It's like, "Yeah, when we said the 15th, we actually meant midnight on the 14th. So we need you at Toronto on the 14th at midnight." And I got married on the 13th.
Oh,
So
Jesus. I
I
know
literally
it kind of
flew there.
sounds cliche or whatever, but that's got to be the hardest thing about what you did at that time, like about being a touring guy. It's got to be the hardest thing is trying to maintain, some even fatherhood and stuff like that, or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Yeah.
even just a relationship or a marriage, that's got to
It,
be
it,
tough.
it was a lot tougher back then too, because like, I mean, it showed me that my wife loved me, because, here we are 25 years later, still married.
Right. That's good.
Um, but, I remember, like, when when I went out with the Stone Temple Pilots, one guy on the tour had a satellite pager so that his wife could call him in case of an emergency, if anything was going on with their son or anything,
Right.
because he had a baby at the time. And um
I
and then
guarantee there was
later,
some sort of tracker on there too that said
yeah.
he's in a strip club. you know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And but nobody had cell phones, or, like, there was no other way to get a hold of people.
Right.
So, like, it's not like nowadays where, email and cell phones and FaceTime and all of those things. Like, e- I remember the first tour I took a cell phone on. It was like, I didn't dare turn the thing on, because if
Right.
you turned it on in the wrong spot, it cost you $50.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
It's funny you mentioned that the pager thing because the first person ever in my life who showed me a two-way pager, one that you could respond on,
yeah.
was Robert Roth.
Ah,
He was the first guy I ever knew who had one of those, and I was like, I got to have one. That's it. I need one of those. And
yeah,
then it just progressed to BlackBerry. Well, yeah, BlackBerry and on and on and on from there. And now we carry friggin' supercomputers in our pocket. But
yeah.
you're talking about the cell phone. So there was a guy that worked at Axe Music. I was selling lighting to clubs and installations and stuff, and he was the audio engineering guy who would help design systems that I was selling to these venues. And we were on a trip going from Calgary to maybe Vancouver or something, but we were driving through BC and we both had the big Motorola brick phone that was like a
Right.
dollar 50 a minute or whatever it was. And I figured out how to forward mine to his. So his phone would ring and he'd look at it and go, "Hello? Yeah, is Marcel there? Yeah, just a second." And he'd pass it to me and I'd have my conversation and give him his phone back. And I'm like, "I don't know how they found me through you. That's weird. Why didn't they just call my phone?" And this kept happening for, like 4 hours on this drive. And finally he's like, "Dude, you're fucking me." And I went, "Yeah, yeah, I am. You're right. I am fucking you."
Yep.
Yeah. But anyways, I digress. So
Well,
so you're living in Atlanta now
I
with your
well, I
wife.
didn't end up moving to Atlanta till '99. So
Oh,
I finished that Leonard Skinner tour, went home, and then Looney called me, a couple of months later and said, or a month or so later, and said, "I need you to go out with Salt and Peppa and this new guy called R. Kelly."
oh
And
boy.
yeah, so he said, "I need you to be R. Kelly's lighting LD." And he goes, I'm gonna design it. Robert's going to design it, and then you go out and operate it, program it, and operate it. And was one of the few people that knew this console at the time called the Compulite, that
Yep.
was sort of pre-whole hog era, right?
Was it
And
Animator or Scan Commander or like,
Animator,
yeah,
the Animator, yeah.
it was a
So
nightmare of a console, but it was the
yeah, it
first like
was.
real moving light console, you know?
Yeah,
So,
that wasn't an artisan. So
right,
um,
exactly.
so I ended up using that, and so they said, but then he came back. He said, I can't have you. I want you to be the crew chief, and you can't be the crew chief and the LD for one of the acts because it's a co-headlining bill. So that'd be a conflict of interest. So I just want you to be the crew chief, and we'll get this other guy to do it. And speaking of nicknames, that was a funny bunch because the LD for Salt and Pepper was Scooter. The guy who ended up coming out and being the LD for R. Kelly was Gonzo.
Yeah.
And my buddy Duck was also on the tour. So I remember like a
Yeah, there's
stagehand
a
coming up
bunch of names.
once going, so let me get this straight. It's Red, Scooter, Gonzo, and Duck. Is this like a Muppets thing, or what do you guys
Right.
going?
That's what it does sound like. It sounds like a band on the Muppets. You're right. That's hilarious. And
Yeah.
his name's John. Yeah.
Yeah.
Funny.
So yeah, we ended up doing that. I ended up doing that tour, and just that was a pretty rough tour. It was the infamous 5 nights in 2 cities in 3 days, or five
Ugh.
shows in 2 cities in 3 days. So we played Radio City Music Hall. Well, first they really didn't tell us what they were doing. The itinerary just said New York and Washington. Didn't actually like
Jesus.
say what was going on. And so we didn't find out till we were almost, at that point in the tour. It's like, oh, by the way, we're going to load out of Detroit. We're going to go straight to New York, load into Radio City Music Hall, and then we're going to load in the lighting in the air, and fly that up. We're going to load in the PA. And we're going to fly all of that, and then we're going to leave, and then we're going to come back the next morning. They're going to have a fashion show or something in front of the curtain the next morning. And then we're going to come in at like noon after that's done, do the set and all the floor lighting and everything. And then we're going to do an 8 o'clock show. And then we're going to reset. We're going to do a midnight show. And then we're going to walk away and go back to the hotel, come back at noon, reset, and do a midnight show,
Jesus
load out,
Christ.
and go straight to Washington, D.C., load into Constitution Hall, which is, if I don't know if you've ever been there, it's a terrible venue to do a show.
I
Lovely
haven't. No.
historical venue, Daughters of the Constitution or whatever run it, but they and it's historical, like can't break anything there, do any,
Yeah.
So anyway, terrible venue, and we loaded in there, and then we did an 8 o'clock show, reset, did a midnight show, and then loaded out. And when it was all said and done, the production manager came on the bus and handed everybody an envelope with $50 in it. I threw
What?
mine back at him. I said, "You can keep it. You
$50.
guys need it more than me." Yeah, for
Wow.
doing all of those extra shows and all of that. It's
You
like
know, I
that was
think
a
it's
heck of a bonus
Robert.
for.
I think it was Robert who told me early, like, I don't know, 30 years ago or something. He said, now, if you ever have to do settlement on one of those shows, it's
Yeah,
tricky. It can be really tricky,
yeah.
So,
Start
yeah.
figuring out, where'd those broken chairs come from? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild.
yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't
Yeah.
want to do
So
that.
I went off of that tour, and I went right off that tour and right onto the Indigo Girls, which was night and day. It was just like the nicest people in the world. Tiny little rig playing 3,000 and 5,000 seat theaters, loading in at 10 o'clock in the morning, done by noon, 1 o'clock. Just everything they were just so nice. They carried
Yeah.
catering. It was just a wonderful experience to go from that to that,
Yeah. Yeah. I can only
And,
imagine.
yeah. But it was about that time. It was just when I was ending the Salt and Pepper tour that Robert called me and he said, "Hey, we need to talk about what you're getting paid." And I'm like, "Yeah, because I want a raise." And he's like, "Yeah, well." So I asked a couple of the other guys, "So how do you deal with Robert when it comes to talking about money?" He says, "Well, first, get a number in your head that you want, and then ask for like twice that, and he'll laugh at you. He'll
Yeah.
laugh heartily at you,
Yeah.
and then he'll settle somewhere, hopefully close to the number that you want."
Yeah.
So I did exactly that. I asked for double what I was making, and And he laughed at me. Just, "You've got to be kidding me, Gibson. Let me tell you something."
That's a good impression.
And he ended up settling for close to what I actually wanted, and then went out on that Indigo Girls tour.
Cool.
And I did that. I ended up being with them for like 2 years, just on and
Wow.
off throughout that tour. Yeah, they were just great people to work with, and it was such an easy, fun tour to be on. They always gave you tour bonuses at the end of the tour. And,
Yeah. Didn't
yeah,
didn't you end up on Kid Rock at some point, like after? Because I think Nook
yeah. So,
stopped touring and you took over or
well,
something.
that was actually, I think that's the last time I saw you in person, was at a Kid Rock
Yeah,
show,
yeah. I used to
somewhere in
love going to
Florida.
Kid Rock shows because,
Uh,
God forbid, Robert comes out at the end of the gig and goes, "Hey, let's go to the strip club down the road,"
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, yeah. Well, it was funny because I did end up going out with Bob, and it was Nook that put me out there. I had done Sugar Ray for Nook,
yeah,
and then we had to do this show called the Gravity Games, and it was Kid Rock was the headliner, and the Foo Fighters, and Busta Rhymes, and Primus, and a whole bunch of different bands.
yeah,
And anyway, we were flying up there, and Nook said, "Hey, I'm going to get you to be the crew chief, and for Kid Rock." And I said, "No way! I am not going out with some white rap guy that's this just does not look like my scene at all. I don't want to do
yeah,
this." And he's like, "No, you're going to do it." And I'm like, "No, no, I'm not. And you can't make." And I told Looney, I said, "You can't make me."
yeah.
And turned out Looney could. So,
That's
so
funny.
Nook and I went up, and I, had never really didn't really know Kid Rock at all. I bought a copy of Rolling Stone because he was on the cover in the airport on the way up there, and so read a little bit about him, and then we did this show, and it was this horrible rig that Nook, nice looking rig that Nook had come up with, but a horrible thing to put together.
Yeah,
And I put the rig together for him, and I said, "You can't tour this rig. This is not a touring rig. This, you can never make me tour this rig." He's like, "Oh, I would never make you tour this rig, Red. This is just for a one-off." Well, turns out when Bob saw the rig, he's like, "This is exactly what I want. Can we tour
yeah,
this?" And Nook said,
great.
"Yeah, of course we can." And then he came back
Yeah,
over and said, "Hey, Red, you got to figure out how to tour this thing." I'm like, so I ended up going out, putting the rig together, figuring out how to make it work, and going out on it. And there was another fella that was actually running the show at that point, and
oh,
he wasn't he wasn't very good. Uh,
yeah,
at He wasn't good at what he was doing. Nook had pre-programmed the entire show on a hog, and unfortunately, he just couldn't run it the way Nook had programmed it.
yeah,
He'd run ahead a few cues because he just wanted to hit the beat every time, and it's like sometimes you just had to hit it and let it do its thing. And he just couldn't stop himself, and so
yeah,
he'd hit it, and it would stop halfway in between a cue, and then he'd go backwards, and some lights would still be spinning gobos because there was nothing telling them to turn off, and so it would end up being a bit of a jumble, and it was being noticed, on and off stage, that it wasn't going well, and the answer was always that the console's crashing. And I'm like, I'm standing right there beside the guy every night, and the console's not crashing. This is what he's doing. And
yeah,
so finally one night, Bob pulled me aside. There's a bit of a long story to it, but I'll shorten it to, I got called we were at a little party in one of the hotel rooms where we were staying, and I got this call saying, "Hey, Bob wants to see you up in his room." So I went up to Bob's room and walked in. He said, "Get in here." And then he threw me a little package of powder, shall we say,
yeah,
and said, "Rack us out a couple. We need to talk."
yeah.
And so I did, and we ended up talking.
Well,
And
he's the boss. You
uh,
gotta.
he, yeah. And then he said, "Can you run the show?" I said, "Of course I can run the show. I had uh, Nook had just prior to that, Nook had been diagnosed with cancer, and wasn't sure that he was going to be able to even be at pre-production. So I had run the whole show, every cue in it, had learned the whole thing on WYSIWYG in case I had to be the one to program it if Nook couldn't come out. And so I knew the show well. And so when Bob asked me if I could do it, I said, "Yeah, of course I can." So I ended up we finished that tour, and then I took over as his LD after that,
Oh,
and
wow.
did 2 more tours with Nook as the designer and he is the LD.
I didn't I didn't realize that Nook's cancer went back that far.
He had this was at that time it was prostate cancer he had. So they gave him radiation seeds, um, and so to kill the cancer,
Yeah.
and it was successful. He beat the cancer, and the side effect of that was that he was sterile. That he would
Yeah.
never have any more children.
Oh
Well,
boy.
as it turned out, they were wrong because he did have another child, Lenny,
Wow.
with Mary Lou, his current wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the cancer that he got this last time was pancreatic cancer,
Right.
and he beat that. But the chemo
Yeah.
and the
Totally.
radiation just was too much for his
Yeah.
system, and it shut down afterwards.
Yeah.
That's what
Oh,
got him.
it's terrible. Terribly sad.
Yeah,
Such a
yeah,
such a giant human, that guy, you
yeah.
know.
He was. He
Oh,
touched a lot of people.
amazing.
You know.
You know,
And
who was it who did the very best Nook impersonation ever? Like had his voice dialed and all of his mannerisms and stuff. It was amazing. I can't remember who that is, but I'll have to have him on the podcast and do a whole podcast with him as Nook.
yeah,
You know. Yeah. It's funny because
yeah.
Nook and I were planning a podcast and we just kept canceling it and fast forwarding by a
Uh,
couple of weeks because he kept saying, "No, my voice is still shit. You know, let's wait another week." And
uh,
then yeah, we just
yeah. And then
didn't get it done.
yeah, he had a lot of interesting stories. I love his book.
I loved his book
The
too.
old man's musings.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
love that book.
he
That's a
called
fantastic
he
book.
he called me a couple of times to like fact check himself. Like he would, as we all remember, everybody remembers everything in their own way, right?
Right, of course.
But I remember he called me the one time. He goes, "Hey, you remember that Metallica tour we did, Summer Sanitarium?" I'm like, "Yeah, I remember Summer Sanitarium, but I don't remember you being there, Nook." He's like, "Yeah, yeah, I was on that tour." I'm like, "No, you were on the Millennium tour that we did prior to that tour."
Funny.
He's like, "Oh, right, right." Uh, and he had we did a run in for the Millennium New Year's with Metallica,
Yeah.
and it was it was LSD. I was the LSD crew chief and Kid Rock's lighting director.
Okay.
And so we did like 3 stadiums in Florida, and then I got off of the Metallica crew bus onto the Kid Rock crew bus. Instead of flying
Jesus.
to New York, I had to ride the crew bus
Wow.
because I was no longer part of the Metallica crew, and upstaging took over for the
Oh,
rest of the the, sh- the show in at the Silver Dome, and then the ensuing tour after that with Kid
wow.
Rock opening. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
So,
it was a fun time.
when did you actually live in Atlanta? When did you move there?
99.
Oh,
So
right.
right before that first Kid Rock tour, I was when Nook got cancer. I was right in the middle of buying a house in Atlanta,
Oh,
so I was prepping the tour by myself, buying a house, and learning all the programming from Nook.
wow. So
It
how
was
long did you end up staying
um,
there?
I lived there till 2000. I moved in 99, and we lived there till 2006.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I always
but my
forget
history
that
in
you
Atlanta
actually,
goes back.
yeah, I forget
Yeah.
that you lived there because the only reason I remember is because I know you're a Falcons fan. Like you're always, posting nonsense about the Falcons like they have a
Yes.
shot. Yeah.
Well, you know what the worst part of that was I was on a plane the other day, and I had to killing some time and so I watch a movie. So I watched 80 for Brady,
I
and
don't know what
of
that
course
is.
80 it's a show with Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda,
Okay.
and anyway they're old ladies and or older women, and
Yeah, careful there, son.
I know.
Yeah.
We try.
Right.
But anyway, they end up going to go see Tom Brady. They want to go see Tom Brady play in the Super Bowl.
Okay.
So they make their way to the Super Bowl to see Tom Brady play in the Super Bowl. Well, guess which Super Bowl it
Yeah, of
was?
course he's had like 27 Super Bowls. It has to be that one. Yeah.
It has to be that one. It's like, really, I have to relive this.
Were you at the game?
I wasn't at the game. I was here at home watching the game,
Oh,
and and just a little side note to that game, I used to, I haven't done it in a while, but I used to, every year I would go and put $20 on the Falcons to win the Super Bowl
Yeah.
in Vegas every year. That year I had put $20 on the Falcons to win the Super Bowl at 44-1.
And they screwed that
At,
up for you.
at halftime, I was counting my money.
Yeah, no kidding. What was it,
pay 20
to 3 or something? I forget the
yeah,
score. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, this is great. I'm going to get paid. They're going to win. This is all perfect. And that didn't work out.
I was so happy because, I'm a Dolphins fan, and we hated Tom Brady and we hated the Patriots. I mean, we didn't used to think about the Patriots because they just sucked every year. Like Bledsoe would come down, we'd pick him off 17 times in a game, and then they get this Tom Brady guy, and all of a sudden he's winning everything, and it's like, come on, man. So we started hating them even more than the Jets somehow. So I was so happy that you guys finally had beat them. And then, Jesus Christ, it's got to be in the record books for the world's biggest implosion of a Super Bowl game.
I know. And you could just feel it coming.
Oh, it was so bad. And what a black and white, like the first half, they couldn't do anything wrong. And the second half, they couldn't do anything right. It was just unbelievable. Anyways, I'm not trying to rub salt in the wound here. I'm sure it still hurts.
I've gotten over it a bit now,
Well, the worst part is you're never going to get back there again. I mean, imagine that. Like, not only did you blow the Super Bowl, you're never going to get back to another one. So,
you're telling me this as a Dolphins fan?
Hey, watch what's coming this year. We got a freight train coming this year. I don't know. We got such a big question mark at quarterback. Like, he's suddenly gone from last year, everybody going, geez, this wasn't a very good move with this guy, to now he's like, God, oh my God, we're going to make every passing record in the world. And I don't know, man. First, you got to keep the guy on the field for a couple games. Yeah. I mean, whatever. It's going to be an interesting season.
We'll see. I am good. I go to the Seahawks games when I'm here in town. I'm a bit of a Seahawks fan, but always Falcons first.
Really?
And
was
as
that
a Canadian,
just because that was your first exposure to American football, basically?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. I knew American teams from watching, in Canada, but it was the Falcons were my first. Atlanta was my first American city that I kind of considered a place that I knew people and grew, and did things. And both my children were born there. And so
you're not a Rough Riders fan, are you?
Of course,
Saskatchewan Rough Riders. You are?
Yeah, I had season tickets when I got out of high school.
They just got beat by the Lions this weekend. My neighbor here in Canmore is from Saskatchewan, and she's a big fan, and they flew out for the game in Vancouver last weekend and got beat. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also, the one I always get a laugh out of, and as a fellow Canadian, I'm sure you can understand this too, is the Blue Jays were just here in Seattle playing the Mariners. Okay. And I always tell people, I says, if you ever want to be dispossessed of the idea that Canadians are nice people, just come to Seattle when the Blue Jays fans come down from Canada.
Oh, really? It's nasty?
Well, Canadians do like a few pops,
Yeah, we like to drink.
And there's that feeling of we're taking over. Like you go from the place will be 3/4 Blue Jays fans.
Yeah,
and they come in with the idea that they're like Toronto Maple Leafs fans. We're taking over your building, right?
Well, South Florida is the worst market in the world for that because everyone wants to come to South Florida in the winter for sports, right? So, Dolphin Stadium is usually half full of Jets fans or Buffalo fans or whatever fans, right? Bears are another one that they always come and buy all our tickets for the games, especially if the Dolphins are doing badly because then there's loads of tickets available anyway. But the Panthers, what they do or did this year in the playoffs, you had to have a Florida driver's license to be able to buy a ticket to a Panthers game.
Right.
But what they did in regular season games for years now is they actually market the game in Montreal or Toronto when it's a weekend game. They always schedule Maple Leafs games and Montreal games on the weekends. And so then what they do is they create a package where for less money than you could buy a ticket to the to the Habs or the Maple Leafs, you could get a weekend in South Florida, a flight, and tickets to the game, right?
Yeah.
And so, I used to have season tickets for the Panthers, and I finally just got pissed because it was like, 2/3 of the people there at a Maple Leafs game were Toronto fans, and
Yeah.
they were generally fairly nice compared to most New York fans and stuff that we're used to in Florida. But still, it's annoying, when the screaming is 3 times as loud for the other team than it is for your team.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting. Like I've got season tickets to the Kraken now that we have the Seattle Kraken now, and I find it's the original 6 teams are the ones that were the most
Right,
annoying and the most fans of the opposing teams show up
right.
in your building.
Yeah, yeah, they'll go anywhere.
Boston, Detroit, Toronto, all those originals. They just Montreal fans aren't quite as obnoxious. The most obnoxious seem to be the Boston fans, I find.
Boston are rough. Philly are rough.
Philly or stuff. Yeah.
Philly can be pretty nasty. Their fans. I've always been
Yeah.
sort of against New York teams. It started with hockey. I always hated the Rangers and the
Yeah.
Devils and the Islanders, and really the only New York team that I don't dislike in a horrible way is the Giants. And you probably hate them because they're in the with the Falcons,
Yeah.
the NFC East or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyways, back to lights.
Yes.
So you're working for Kid Rock. You're in Atlanta. You're working with so PRG hadn't taken over RA Roth yet, right?
Yeah, they had. Yeah.
Oh,
When
okay.
I came back in '97. I had taken a gig working as the very light operator tech for production of Showboat, and so since was in the union in Vancouver, and they wanted a union very light guy, and I was like the only guy that was in the union that actually had been to very light school,
Oh,
other
wow.
than a couple other. There were a couple other fellas, but they had moved on to other things at that point, and so I ended up really, getting the gig and thought, well, this will be interesting. I was able to actually like not tour for a little while in
Yeah.
Vancouver. I was home for eight months,
Nice.
and it was an easy gig. You only work one show a day, and it's all set up. So you come in there a couple hours before, check everything out, make sure it all works, fix anything if it's broken, hit the queue 365 times, and
Yeah.
get on your Harley and ride home.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
enjoyed that, and then I ended up going on the road with it to Minneapolis, LA, and Denver, and then I'd kind of heard Old Man River more times than I wanted to, and Looney phoned me out of nowhere and says, "Hey, can you come do Leonard Skinner?" And I said, "I thought I told you I would never do Leonard Skinner again." He said, "No, no, dude, they all got out of rehab. It's a dry tour. It's going to be great. You'll love it. Be perfect." And it's got a couple of breaks, and I had just recently gotten engaged, and I was like, "Oh, a couple of breaks, go home. This would be
Nice.
good."
Yeah.
So I ended up taking that gig, and that was they had just started the company Lighting Technologies, which was
Oh, okay. Yeah.
uh, that had been it was a lot of the same people from RA Roth, and even some of the same gear from RA Roth,
Yeah.
um, and it was based in Atlanta, and it was under PRG, but that was before they had started naming things all differently.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah,
was still
that was so
Vanco and
messy. That got so
yeah,
messy. And then the touring
yeah,
division was going to be LSD, and the this division was going to be production arts, and it was like just such a mess.
yeah,
And then it was just finally PRG. I told Jerry that right from the beginning. You got to just
yeah,
call everything PRG. And he went, no, no, we
yeah,
want to retain the identity of, okay.
yeah.
You know how that goes for you.
Yeah, well, and so they went through all of the various names and whatnot, and I ended up. So anyway, I did that tour with Skinnerd,
Yeah.
and you know, they were dry for the first few months, and but it was not near the kind of darkness that it was back in when I toured with them
Right.
originally. And then so I ended up working back and forth with them for several tours over the years, and ended up doing the Indigo Girls again, and
Oh, geez.
Prince, and then ended up Sugar Ray and Kid Rock, and for Nook, and yeah, that kind of worked out.
What
And
what period was that for Prince? Was that like pre name change or?
that was that was like he wasn't using his name at that point. He was
Oh,
using
so it was
just the
the
glyph.
symbol. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Um,
did that ever get in your way? Cause like I ended up going to lunch with Prince and his manager and the lighting designer who was building a club in Miami, a glam slam club for Prince.
mm,
And so right before lunch, I said to his manager, you know, so when I address him, what do I call him? And he said, you don't. And
yeah.
I'm like, well, what do you mean you don't? Like, I got to say, hello, sir, Prince, you
Yeah.
know, symbol, whatever you are. And he's like, no, no, just don't do that. Don't put yourself in that situation where you got to address him like by a name. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I mean, that might be easy
Well,
for you guys, but Jesus, I
yeah.
grew up with this
They
guy
told
named Prince, right?
Yeah, they told us not to ever, make eye contact with him or look at him wrong or do
Oh,
anything
wow.
like that.
Yeah.
But I remember standing on stage at Madison Square Garden, and we were coming up on the dark hour in a hurry, and I was trying to get the lights focused on the downstage. And so I was standing at his microphone. He had that little pistol,
Yeah.
and I'm like calling focus, and I'm like, on me, on me, on me, on me, on me, on me, and all of a sudden I felt this, like, there's somebody standing right behind me, isn't there? And I turned around, and it was him. And so he was like standing right there, and I turned around and I looked him right in the eye, and he looked me right in the eye, and he was like, my microphone, and I'm like, oh, all yours, go ahead. And turned around and stood behind him, on him, on him, on him,
Yeah.
trying
That's
to get the
funny.
lights done as fast as I could.
That's funny.
So
Yeah.
because you don't bust that dark hour at Madison Square Gardens.
Yeah. Yeah. So
But
how'd you end up getting back out to Seattle then?
um, so I was with um, I was with PRG at that point. They had basically moved all of their gear out of Atlanta and out of Nashville at that point, and were kind of consolidating in Vegas. And and Robert told me that I should move to Vegas and continue working out of there. And I didn't want to live in Vegas.
Right.
Um,
Can't imagine why not.
yeah, just love the desert.
Yeah, it's just not my
But
thing. Like so many people, the people who I know who live there just swear by it. They're like, "Oh my god, it's the
yeah,
best place in the world." But
my best friend lives there, and he loves the place.
yeah,
He's been there. He moved not long after I moved to Atlanta.
Larry.
He loves it there. Yeah,
Yeah.
he just But I don't want to live in the desert.
Yeah.
That's not my thing. You
Yeah.
know,
Me neither.
when your name's red, you kind of don't do well in with all that
Well,
sun.
and Larry's always posting like these 20-mile bike rides in 110-degree temperatures and stuff. It's like, what are you
Yeah,
doing, man? Ugh.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know. And he loves to go ride around out in the sun. I'm like, well, good for you there, bud.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know.
I'll come over to your house, and after you've done your ride, and we can have a cigar and a hot tub. But
Yeah.
you enjoy that ride.
Yeah. Yeah. Have at her.
But yeah, so I ended up. It was funny because I had heard from a friend that Christie Lights was looking for an operations manager, and I was at the time when I got the call. I was out with the Foo Fighters, and I was in Detroit. And I remember I was actually standing outside Joe Louis, looking across the river at the Canadian flag flying on the other side, and my phone rang, and and I look over, and it's Terry Higgs. I haven't heard that name
Oh, wow.
forever.
Yeah.
And so he said, "Hey, we're looking for an operations manager for Christie Lights in Seattle, and I know it's been a few years, but you'd mentioned somewhere along the line you might want to, get off the road." And so I said, "Yeah, I'd be interested." So he gave my name to Huntley and said that I would be calling. And so I called Huntley, and we didn't know each other, but we had talked a little bit through the years. And anyway, I ended up talking to him, and he kind of said that he had somebody else in mind for the job, and that I didn't think I was the guy for it. So I kept him on the phone for 2.5 hours, um,
Jesus.
and and by the time we were done, he said, I
You
think you may be the
convinced him.
guy for the job.
Wow.
Convinced him, and
Good on you.
so yeah. So as it turned out, they offered me the job and moved me from Atlanta to Seattle to take over operations here, and I did that for 3 years.
Was
Did
that a
the
tough
operations
transition
management
for you
position.
going from being a road guy to jumping into full time in a shop and not traveling and
The hardest part for me was commuting. I didn't like to commute.
yeah.
I hated getting up. I don't mind getting up in the morning. I just hated getting in a car and spending an hour on the road
Yeah.
and in traffic,
Yeah.
and that's what made me figure out that there was a reason I'd been a roadie my whole life, and that was that I didn't like to commute and do those sorts of things. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so I remember I said to my wife at one point, I just said, hon, if I have to keep doing this, I'm gonna go all Michael Douglas one day on the 405, and it's not gonna be pretty.
Yeah.
So I gotta stop. I gotta find something else to do. Um, I enjoyed the job. I enjoyed doing the job. I just didn't like the 9 to 5 of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's
Um,
kind of what you're signing up for, right?
yeah.
she, did
So
did she like or hate having you around at first?
it was a big transition.
I
It was
can only
tough
imagine. Yeah.
because I mean I don't know how many guys but you'd always see guys on the road when you were touring and be like, "Yeah, this is my last tour. I'm going home. Gonna spend my time with the wife and kids." And 6 months later, you'd see the
They're
guy back out
divorced.
on another tour, and you were like, "Yeah, what happened? Divorced?"
Yeah. Well, or she
Turns
just
out we
said,
were
get out
better.
of here or we're going to be divorced. You know,
Yeah.
so many people during
So
COVID were telling me that, like, just how it was such a huge adjustment just to be stuck at home for a full year. Like they've never been at home for a year during their entire marriage, and I've been
yeah,
married 25 years and I've never been home with my wife for more than a month.
yeah.
So,
So it was a big transition that,
yeah.
um, but made it through, and then just as I was worrying about what I was going to do, they offered me the position of account manager. So
That's cool.
yeah,
And so was that challenging or like, cause I know, because that's a sales gig basically, right? So,
yeah,
that's got to be a bit of a transition too.
yeah, it was. Hey, can we take a break for a second?
Absolutely.
I,
All right, we're back. We had older gentleman break. We both had to pee out coffee, so yeah.
yeah,
So anyways,
not like
where
the
were
old
we?
days when it would have been beer.
We were in your
We were
transition
taking.
from shop guy to or general manager, shop manager to touring exec or account exec.
Yeah, so I ended up. Uh, they basically when I was offered the job, they offered me the job and they said, "Oh, and by the way, can you take over the Microsoft account?"
Oh,
So it seemed like kind of a good way to go,
not a
and
tiny account.
yeah, and I had always kind of felt like I could be an account manager, that I had it within me to do the job, and that I could get along with people. I knew a lot of people from all of my time in the business,
Yeah,
and I felt like I could be that guy that was be the account manager that I'd always wanted to have.
yeah,
I'd learned from a lot of really good people like RA and from
yeah,
Nook and Looney and fellows up in Canada like Terry Higgs and Ian Gordon,
yeah,
Chris Grant. So since I I was surrounded also by all those same people.
yeah.
They're all here at Christie Lights, so seemed like a good way to go, and I spent the first year really trying to figure it out because of course I took the job in 2009 and then the Great Recession hit.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it seemed
Well,
like
and you
a
were doing
great time to.
mostly corporate accounts at that point, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a great time to take on a fully commissioned gig,
Oof. Yeah.
So
Nice. Yeah, because
but
Christy does this whole you're basically your own business, right? When you're
yes.
yeah, so it's an
Yeah,
interesting approach. You can make a shit ton of money when times are good, but COVID was a bit painful. Yeah.
yeah, because then it's also you're not making any money. You get paid based on what you bring
Revenue.
in,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a and you know it's a there's a whole system to it, but it is yeah, like 2019 was a really really great year, and 2020 really really wasn't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, you've recovered. I know I talked
yeah,
with Robert about it, and I talk with Chris McMean every once in a while about it, and I've talked with Huntley about
mhm,
it. Huntley basically
yeah,
laid out for me how the whole thing works because I think it's, it's potentially either crazy or ingenious depending on what year you're in. But
yeah.
yeah,
A lot of people say that about a lot of things. Like Huntley has done some what people thought were crazy things at the time that turned out to be forethought. Like
yeah,
at the time when everybody was like all about the whole hog, Huntley went Grand MA
yeah.
and said, nope, not going to stock the whole
Well,
hog.
Martin,
I'm going.
yeah, the
Yeah, and
Martin thing
Martin.
that
I
he
mean,
did, the big exclusive deal he did with Martin for a while.
yeah, right before the 2K came out,
Yeah,
which took over the market at that time.
yeah.
Um,
The racking thing with the certain size road boxes, which I remember getting
yeah,
the walk through the shop on when they did that. Huntley walked me through. I think it was Orlando, and
mhm,
I was just like, "This is either brilliant or really stupid," And I can't
mhm,
quite figure it out yet. And it was all based on truck pack and making some fluidity, I guess, through the product line or whatever. And,
yeah.
Amazon has done a very similar thing and it seems to work okay for them. So maybe Huntley was onto something.
Well, it does make a big difference. Like I remember doing a Tragically Hip tour, and the production manager, as we were packing the trucks, complaining like, "Why do the lighting guys always have so many different size cases? Why can't you guys put things in standardized cases?"
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh, it's all different gear, different lights."
Yeah.
But Huntley took that and went, "Okay, here's the cases. Make the product fit into the cases,"
Yeah.
and sure makes packing a truck a whole lot easier.
So you've been with Christy now like 24 years then, right?
No,
20.
this would be my 17th year now. 2006, I started
Oh,
with Christy.
2006. Yeah, you were
Yeah,
Atlanta till 2006, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Wow, 17 years. That's a good run.
yeah, yeah.
And
I
you still love
can't complain.
Seattle?
I love Seattle. I really
Yeah.
do enjoy the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
I liked living like living in Vancouver was very good for me. I enjoyed Vancouver a lot.
Yeah.
I like the Pacific Northwest. I like the greenery. I like the trees.
Yeah, me
There's
too.
a West Coast attitude that just kind of groove on. And
Yeah.
I used to, and then I when I moved to Atlanta, I loved living in the South, and I used to kind of joke. People in Vancouver used to joke that I was a Saskatchewan redneck, and I said, well, when I went to Atlanta, they thought I was a liberal.
That's funny. Yeah, that is
So
funny. True.
yeah, so coming back up here was great, and as my wife, she adjusted. She was from Princeton, BC
Yeah.
to Vancouver to Atlanta was a big adjustment for her, and but she did it and did a good made it through, um
Do you have any kids?
and
I
she
don't
had
remember.
two kids.
Two kids.
They're 20 coming up 21 and 23 now. So
Oh, okay.
uh,
Not
um
too kid
but
like
like
anymore.
yeah, no. But for my wife that was really tough because not only did she was she now married to a road dog, but I left her alone in Atlanta, by
Yeah.
herself, and she
Oh
had to
boy.
make the best of it down there.
That's wild.
And
Yeah.
and pregnant and husband away working with Kid Rock, and so
Oh jeez.
yeah, so it was a transition. But I do love being on the West Coast now.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to leave Seattle,
Yeah. Oh, good for you,
and
man.
last summer I became an American citizen finally. So
Oh, congrats.
thank you.
Congrats. Yeah, I did that. I think probably right after 9/11, I just felt
Hmm.
sudden like a I don't know, I felt patriotic, I guess, right after 9/11.
Yeah.
And so I went and applied for my citizenship. And it's funny because when I applied for the citizenship, I get back a letter that says, congratulations, we've received your letter and we will respond to you within 730 days. I'm like, really? Like you
Yeah.
send me a letter to tell me I'm going to get a response within 2 years? That is
Yeah.
insane. And so then that 2 years became like after 9/11. I'm sure you remember,
Mhm.
Bush was very hated and there was a lot of war going on and most of the world hated Americans. And I was
Mhm.
traveling a lot at the time for work to Europe and to Asia and stuff. So I would travel with my Canadian passport. I always
Yeah.
traveled with my Canadian, even after I got an American one, until the world shifted again, and then I just didn't update. I actually just a couple of weeks ago, I just applied for a new Canadian passport because I haven't had one in almost 20 years. So,
Yeah.
so that'll be exciting to get that. It's always nice to have
Yeah.
options,
Yeah. Well, and
just in case, just in case you
yeah.
murder somebody and you got to run to another country quickly. It's good to have another passport. I've always seen it that way. Anyways,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Quick getaway if you need to.
So, hockey, you're still an Oilers fan, right?
I am, but
Yeah.
I'm also
Oh
become
yeah,
a
Seattle,
big
right? Of
Kraken
course,
fan
yeah, yeah,
because season tickets and I've never I grew up in Regina. We had the Pats, but
yeah,
I never had an
yeah,
NHL team, so I gravitated towards the Oilers when they went to Edmonton,
yeah. No, I'm the
and just
same.
and
I'm the same because I'm a obviously diehard lifelong, well, not lifelong, but since I was very young when the Atlanta Flames moved to Calgary. But
Mhm.
I've always been a Flames fan. But when I moved to South Florida, not that long after I moved there in '91, in '93 they got a team, and my boss at the time at Martin bought season tickets, and he was French and had never seen hockey in his life. It was just the cool new sport, so he's like, I gotta have
Yeah.
season tickets. And I remember the first game I went to with him, he a fight started, and it was me. It might have been me and my ex-wife and him and his son, and this fight starts, and him and his French son are both going, what is going on? Why don't they stop them? Why are they letting them do this? Why don't they stop them? This is barbaric. This is crazy. And they're losing their minds. And fast forward 6 months or 3 months or whatever, and they're like, kick him, punch him again, kill that guy. They're
Kick his
they're
ass.
converted. Yeah, kick his ass. Yeah, I mean it was hilarious. So then a couple years later, I bought season tickets and I had them for, I don't know, 20 years or something until I moved. I lived in Fort Lauderdale and I moved up to West Palm Beach, and it was about an hour to get to games, which was fine. But then you want to have a couple beers and then you got to drive an hour back and it's midnight by the
Yeah.
time you get home. Forget it. I watch it on television now. I'm an old guy.
Yeah.
So
I did decide to get kind of all in with the Kraken.
what? Jesus. Damn, you are committed.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Do you have an Oilers one on the
uh,
other shoulder?
I don't.
Uh,
Never did get an Oilers tattoo.
the
But
Oilers are damn good. I mean, I was surprised they didn't do better in the playoffs than they did. But
I was kind of disappointed in
yeah,
having to put up with the fact that Larry's team uh, was the
yeah,
one that won the cup, beat them and won the cup was
yeah.
really hard for me to
Beat
take.
my team and won the cup too. Yeah, but yeah, I knew the Panthers weren't going to have it for Las Vegas. I mean, they were so beat up. Guys playing with broken
Uh,
feet and broken this, and
Broken wrists and
I mean,
yeah.
just they were so beat up. They were over their skis by that point. Like they had outplayed. Like just the fact that they beat Boston blew everybody away. Like wow,
Yeah.
it was a fun
Yeah.
playoff year for me though. I'll tell you that. It was
Yeah, no,
definitely interesting.
I was in heaven for the longest time there because the Oilers and the Kraken were on opposite nights.
Yeah,
So
there you go.
okay, Kraken game one night, Oilers game the second night, Kraken one
Yeah,
night, Oilers is next, and yeah, and then going to the home games. But then it all came to a halt within 2 days. It was like, oh,
yeah,
they're both out.
yeah. Oh yeah, you had it rough. Yeah, that's true.
It
They
was
were
like,
both
oh,
out
heavy
within a couple
disappointment.
days. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, I never thought of that, but that was brutal. But what was I going to say? Yeah, don't move back to the East Coast because that's the hard thing. Like living in South Florida, if I want to watch Flames games, they're at freaking 10 o'clock at night.
yeah,
It's so nice being out here, even on mountain time when, games start at like 5 o'clock and Panthers games start at, 7 o'clock or whatever, or Flames games
yeah,
start at 7 o'clock. It's great.
yeah. I swear, the whole time that I lived in Atlanta, I never once saw the end of Monday Night Football.
No, me neither.
because I would fall asleep before the
Yeah,
game
me
would be
too.
over every
Me too.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. I rarely watch. I mean, if the Dolphins are in it, I'll watch it. But other than that, like I'll watch the first half and then start winding down. And by the start of the
Mhm.
fourth quarter, I'm asleep, because we're old.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're probably similar age, I would guess. I'm 59.
I just turned 60. So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah. You look
Yeah.
younger than me, so that's good. You got that going for you.
Thanks.
You still look younger than me. Yeah. So what else? I mean, so you're busy right now. I would guess it's been an insane year. Last year was probably the biggest year ever by miles.
Last year was such a strange year because it started off with COVID and things not going well again. One of my larger touring clients had a Canadian tour booked, and I had the gear on hold, and I'd actually kept it together from so we didn't have to do a complete reprep. And then he ended up having to cancel the Canadian tour because of all of the COVID stuff going on, and then
Yuck.
canceled his fall tour or his spring tour. So that took a bit of a bite out of things. But once things got rolling around April, it turned into a good year. And this year's been crazy busy. There's been a lot of tours. The the three worst the three worst words that I've gotten to know in the last couple of years: supply chain issues.
Yeah. No
Haven't
kidding.
been
Huh?
as bad this year. Last year
Yeah.
was just terrible. You just couldn't get gear, you couldn't get parts, couldn't get
Yeah.
things fixed,
Yeah. It was
couldn't find
brutal.
any people.
Yeah.
So many people left the industry.
Yeah.
And as I tell people, I said it's not just that people left the industry, because we did have a lot of people that went on to other things and never came back.
Yeah.
But we also had 2 years where nobody came into the industry.
Yeah.
We
That's true
weren't
too.
bringing that next crop of people that were always up and coming. So
Yeah.
suddenly, when we all
Good
tried to get
point.
back at it, uh, there wasn't the same amount of people to do all of the stuff, and there wasn't any new people that had come in.
Yeah.
So
What about on the
so
corporate side? Like I know, um, between COVID and then all of the Zoom people and all of the remote work and all that stuff, corporate events, have they been bigger because they're pulling together lots and lots of remote people, or have they been smaller or non-existent because, they're all remote? Like, have you
I
seen
find
anything?
that there's a bit, like, I'm not up to where I used to be with my corporate clients.
Yeah.
A lot of them are doing more podcasts, more studio work,
Yeah.
and a lot of them, like Microsoft being a good example, really did a lot of work in their studios and really
Yeah.
perfected their broadcast and podcast kind of stuff. So they've been doing more of that. So I'm not finding that the bigger shows are bigger again, but some of them are back and back up to the level, close to the levels that they used to be,
Right.
but
Yeah.
still not
T- Touring's
where it
gone
was.
batshit nuts, but corporates are still sort of inching their way upward. I think,
Yeah,
in the whole commercial, corporate, real estate, corporate, whatever, it just all seems to be sort of figuring itself out right now. Like, what
yeah,
are we? What is our identity now? What does this look like? Do people come back to work? Do people not come back to work? It's all so scattered at this point, I
yeah,
guess. Yeah.
yeah. It's definitely not what it used to be, and they're trying to figure out, like, like I say, a lot of them have gone like, well, we get our message out with the studio, and we do a podcast or do a broadcast. But by that same token, they're also realizing that there's something to be said for in person,
Yeah, there's huge
and that
value in getting your team together.
there, yeah,
Well,
in
and in a
actual
sense, maybe
personal,
more so. Maybe more
yeah,
so now that people are so remote, you want to get your team together, more often in bigger ways and in more unique ways and stuff. So, yeah, I
yeah.
mean, I don't
So
think
I think some of
in-person events are going to go
that's
away.
no, no. So
Yeah.
I'm finding that I'm not up to, like, 2018 levels, 2018, 2019 levels yet, but it is
Really?
coming back.
Huh.
So
Yeah, it's interesting because it depends who you talk to. Because even within Christie, some of the people I talk to are like, 2022 was my biggest year ever, by
yeah,
30% or whatever. And then other people, maybe not so much. And I think it's partly proximity and who your clients are. Like you obviously have Microsoft and other companies up there, big corporations,
yeah,
Nike
yeah.
and
I have a lot of tech clients.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well,
Yeah.
if you happen to be driving to Regina at any point and you're coming through Calgary, give me a shout and I'll buy you a beer or something and finish the talk. We're probably starting to bore people with hockey talk and stuff now, so time to
Okay,
move
sounds
on.
like a plan.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's been super interesting and fun, and I didn't realize how many ways our paths have crossed in the past because, like I said, I forgot sort of my 20s, my late teens and 20s. Much of it's forgotten. And
Yeah,
not
a lot of
because I
that's pretty
hated it, but
blurry.
because it was the opposite. I loved it. I had too much fun,
Yeah, I was
but yeah,
enjoying myself way too much.
yeah, it's true. All right, my friend. Well, you have an amazing rest of your day. I appreciate you taking the time. If there's ever anything I can do for you, just give me a shout.
Sounds great.
All right.
Appreciate
Peace,
it.
man.